going to be talking about graphing from slope-intercept form. This is a new method of graphing that allows us to graph things very quickly. The format for slope-intercept form is very similar to what we've already been talking about, which has been direct variation or proportional equations, which has been y equals mx. Our m has stood for our slope, and on our graphs, they always start at the origin. Now our graphs could look like this, or they might be less steep, but still go through the origin, through the center of my graph. Or they could even be steeper, as long as it passes through the origin. Today we're going to add one additional step. We're going to add a plus b. This b is going to represent our y-intercept, and that's going to shift our starting point up or down on our y-axis. So to begin with, I'd like you to make sure that you write down this format. And we're going to write down what each of these means. So slope-intercept form, and here's my equation for slope-intercept form. And you're going to hear this a lot over the next couple of years. So y equals m. M is standing for my slope. Remember, slope is always a ratio or a fraction. On top is how much my y is changing, and on bottom, how much my x is changing. So up and down versus how far side to side. B will represent my y-intercept. On a graph, your y-intercept can be found on the y-axis. So when I change my y-intercept, if I write plus 2, I'm going to move up my y-axis 2. If it says minus 3, I would, from the center, move down 3. Now if you're a little confused, okay, continue watching, and we're going to put all of this together. Graph y equals 3x plus 1. Remember that 3, which is always, or your slope, which is always in front of x, can be written as a fraction, and I'm going to make sure it's a fraction first. 3 over 1 is my slope. Let's label that. 1 is my y-intercept, equals 1. So how do I graph this? Well, my first step is always to utilize the y-intercept. I need a starting point. My slope just tells me the directions on how to get to a second point or a third point, but that y-intercept tells me where my first point should be plotted. The plus 1 tells me I'm going to start from my origin, like I did with my proportional equations, but plus 1 means I'm going to shift up 1. Because it's a y-intercept, I'm going to stay on the y-axis, and I'm going to plot a point. Take a second and make a graph and plot that y-intercept. All right. Next step is to create the rest of my line. Well, in order to create a line, I need 2 points. I have a first point, and in order to get to my second point, I'm going to utilize my slope. In order to get to my next point, I'm going to utilize my slope. The 3 of my slope tells me to rise, and the 1 is telling me to run. Remember, a positive 3 means I'm going to move up 3, and a positive 1 on the run means I'm going to move to the right. So I'm going to go back to my starting point at 1, and I'm going to use those instructions to get to the second point, kind of like a treasure hunt. Rise 3, so up 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to run 1. So from there, I'm going to run 1, and I'm going to place my dot. Let's practice that again. So I can use my slope to get to my third point. So rise 1, 2, 3, run, 1. Plot my point. Now notice these lines all form a straight line, and I can connect them and draw arrows on both sides. I can also graph in reverse. Down, 1, 2, 3, the opposite direction, and instead of right 1, I can move left 1, and that would continue my line in reverse, still staying straight. Let's try a second example. Y equals negative 1/2 x minus 3. So my slope is negative 1/2, and my y-intercept equals, because there is a minus sign, I'm going to say negative 3. Remember, I always use my y-intercept first and my slope second. I need my first point, and the slope helps me get to the directions to my second point. So I always start from the center and I look for my y-intercept. It says negative 3, so I'm going to move down 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to plot my original first point. Once I have my first point, I can use my slope to get to my second point. Now, if you ever have a negative in front of your fraction, I am always going to assign it to the top. So I'm going to rewrite this. Negative 1/2. That tells me where that negative should go and what directions I am going to be going. So this is my rise. And in this case, since it's negative, I'm going to be moving down. And my run is positive, so I'm going to be moving to the right. Now that I have my directions clearly stated, I'm going to go back to my starting point and follow those directions. I'm going to go down 1 and run 2 and plot my next point. I can continue that pattern, down 1, run 2, plot my point. Down 1, run 2. And you can see each point I add continues to be on that same line. If I wanted to get my line to go in the other direction, I'm going to do the exact opposite. Instead of down, I'm going to move up, and instead of right, I'm going to move left. And that will allow me to continue my line in the opposite direction. Let's try a few more examples. Y equals x plus 2. Let's identify our slope and our y-intercept first. If our slope is not written, notice it's a blank in front of x. So it's not 0. If it's blank in front of x, there is a 1. So let's write our slope. If it's not written as a fraction already, I'm going to write it as a fraction. 1/1 is my slope. We also call it oftentimes m. So if you ever see m equals, that's what it's referring to. 2 is my y-intercept. Remember, I always graph my y-intercept first and my slope second. So to begin with, y-intercept. To get to my y-intercept, I always start at the center. It's a positive 2, so I'm going to move up 2 and plot my point. My slope tells me where to go from there. The 1 tells me to go up 1, and the positive 1 on the bottom tells me go to the right 1. So from my original point, up 1, over 1. Up 1, to the right 1. Plot point. Up 1, to the right 1. And I can see that I have my straight line formed. I can also do in reverse. Instead of going up, I can go down. Instead of going right, I can go left. And that's the exact opposite. It's going to create my line going backwards. Let's look at this example. Now, notice I have y equals negative 2x. Remember, this is just like my proportional direct variation equation. There's no plus b on this problem. Now, what does that mean? That means I'm going to start at my origin. Now, if you're a little hesitant about that, remember that there's an imaginary plus 0 on the end of that negative 2x, telling you that 0 is telling you I'm not going to move up at all or move down at all. I'm going to stay at the origin. So there's my y-intercept. And my slope is -2. Now remember, slope must be written as a fraction, so -2 over 1. The -2 tells me to move down 2, and the +1 tells me to move to the right. So from my starting point, down 2 to the right 1, down 2 to the right 1, down 2 to the right 1. And my pattern can be continued forever in that direction. Or I could go in reverse. I would want to extend my line this way, so up 2 and over 1, up 2 and over 1. And that is graphing from slope-intercept form.